My next guest, as I just mentioned, is a good friend, Republican Senator Bill Cassidy of Louisiana. Senator Cassidy is a member of the Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee. Senator, it's great to see you again. Usually, we're talking healthcare. Today, we're going to talk education. I could talk, oil and energy policy right now in this time of great crisis in the country. But what I like very much about some of what you've been trying to put on the table is to remember that not every human being, not every American citizen comes packed with this, wired the same way. Some have challenges and they can become strengths, but you've been focused during this period on those with dyslexia because it is important. We have many famous dyslexics in America who've done just fine, have come along, but you've been worried during this period of time about dyslexia and education. Tell us what you're doing to address that.
Thank you, Steve. Thanks for having me. 1 out of 5 Americans are dyslexic. Now, our country does an incredibly poor job, specifically in the public school system, in both identifying and addressing the dyslexia. When the Secretary of Education speaks about how there is almost a conspiracy against some children, I would agree. But I would say that if 1 out of 5 children are dyslexic, and you're not even screening for it in most places, and the intervention that you have after that has been proven to be ineffective, and yet nonetheless you stay with it, that is a bigger culprit than the fact that somebody's trying to pass a law that'll go into effect 5 years from now after court challenges. It is more important, as a doctor, I would say this, to make the correct diagnosis. Why are 1 out of 4 of our children not reading to grade level? And if you're speaking of children of color, 50% of children of color are not reading at grade level in the 3rd grade. You learn to read first 3 grades, you read to learn thereafter. If they're not reading, if they're reading below the average, below competency in grade 3, their trajectory is diminished. The injustice is that we are not screening and not putting in appropriate implementation of the measures to address it. And instead, we stay with that which is not scientific. You just pushed an obsession of mine, Steve. I'm sorry.
No, I'm really interested because I have a family member. I'll be honest, folks, sometimes it's very personal for me. I had a family member, a brother who was dyslexic, where the treatment he got, like I'm older than the generation in schools now, of course, but he was made to feel it was his fault. It was made to feel as if he was the one there. I mean, you kind of go through that and you see how it damaged a person's sense of self-identity, self-worth, confidence, so many different issues. And then I see famous dyslexics who tell me about that magical moment. People who've been cabinet secretaries in other governments who've said, I had a teacher who finally understood and turned it around and created different opportunities. And we shouldn't be building an education system around miraculous boutique moments. So I guess my question is, that's my little editorial, but my question is the science there? Is the screening there? What would be the story we can scale?
Yes, absolutely. There's a doctor and Dr. Shaywitz at Yale School of Medicine Pediatric Department, who are the only husband-wife team in the National Academy of Science. And they have literally written the book on dyslexia. There is a curriculum which you can employ. Full disclosure, my wife is the chair of the board of a public charter school for children with dyslexia. Now, those people you reference, almost all, if not every single one, had highly educated parents that were able to bring their child to an educational setting in which they were recognized as dyslexic and they were accommodated. What is different is those who are lower income, perhaps single parent family. The parent does not have the resources, perhaps does not even recognize. And she hears her child called stupid. She knows she or he is not stupid, but nonetheless does not have the resources. I would argue that we have to democratize access to that sort of intervention that makes a difference in the life of such a child. That's discriminatory. Again, not some law that's going to be fought in court, implemented 5 years from now. It is the absence of screening and appropriate intervention for those who have less means, including middle-class families who cannot afford the tuition at a high price school.
Well, let me ask you the same question I asked Secretary Cardona as well. So, literally billions upon billions of dollars are going out to begin trying to address some of the homework gap, the schooling gaps that we've had out there, the mental health stress, a lot of folks. And you and I have discussed your health approach as a practicing doctor across areas, trying to reach communities that were not well resourced, communities in need. What can we do to do a better job of, in this moment where a lot of money is going out there, to begin trying to rectify some of the imbalances we've had in the past, so that we might help a community leapfrog into a place where at least their opportunities are greater and on par with those who have resources?
Steve, you may recall my principle, if you will, in healthcare is that the patient should have the power. As long as it's an institution, the interest of the institution is for the institution. It has to be the patient. I extend the same thing to education. The parent should have the power. It's usually the mom, so I'll use the feminine. She is the one who has to make the decision. If a school system like Chicago decides that the teachers union decides to shut down, despite receiving hundreds of millions of dollars to stay open and the science showing that they can, but they choose to shut down, that parent should not be tethered, tied, chained to that set of schools. Right. She should have the ability to take the money the school is receiving on her behalf and go to the school which she chooses to bring her child. This is not about an institution of people trying to take care of their pensions. It is about the child. And when we make the focus the child, good things happen.
Let me just ask you quickly, before we have an audience question for you as well. You and Elizabeth Warren are on the same page on something which doesn't happen every day, and it's on college transparency. And one of the things I've been trying to think is, when do we begin thinking about disrupting higher education? A lot of folks are investing a lot of dollars, and they get on the other side, and the opportunities they have may not match up with how they've invested, and they end up with lots of debt. So I'm just really, can you give me a snapshot of how you and Elizabeth Warren are seeing the world the same?
Yeah, it's the same principle. It's the individual should have the power. Right now, a child gets some glossy asking her to borrow a lot of money, take her Pell Grants, and go to a high-priced school to study a curriculum in which she may not graduate. And if she does, the curriculum in which she graduates has little economic opportunity. What we propose is that there be an online, easily accessible and understood database where I'm 18 with my family. I log on, and whatever I look like, if I'm a black female, black male, Hispanic male, white guy, I'm able to log on and say, if I go to this school in this curriculum, what is my likelihood of graduating in 4 years? How much will I expect to borrow? And what will I earn in the future? The best schools track this information, and they have found that sometimes for $100 to $500, a child doesn't graduate, left with the debt, without the degree, without the economic prospects. And they give them $500 and the life is different. On the other hand, if you go through some crypt course curriculum and you graduate with no skill but to be a barista, then you've just wasted potentially hundreds of thousands of dollars. This works for the institution. They get to take care of their facility fees, etc. We need it to work for the student. Elizabeth and I are collaborating to give the student the power of information so that she or he can make the informed decision for their choice.
Fascinating. We have a question for you from Kate. Kate?
Kate Claybaugh, Director of Government Affairs for the National PTA. A question for Senator Cassidy. Any insight into what's coming together in Congress as it relates to youth mental health? And how can advocacy organizations support these efforts on the Hill?
Yeah, so there's a couple aspects to that. I have a real interest in mental health. Clearly, the epidemic with children isolated at home has exacerbated both opioid addictions as well as underlying mental health issues, anxiety disorders, etc. I am personally a big believer in school-based clinics, having done some of my previous work kind of through school-based clinics. There'll be a push to try and allow that care to occur where the child attends school. There'll also be an attempt to make sure that Medicaid screening programs, I think it's EPSDT, will include mental health screening, and that the kind of Medicaid system is not atomized with a bunch of different silos, but rather integrated for the benefit of the child. There also, since unfortunately there's also youth addiction, there'll be more dollars being put towards addictive services. Lastly, I will say, in 2016, Chris Murphy and I got a bill passed, the Mental Health Reform Act of 2016, in which we put out more money for the so-called RAISE program. Typically, people have their major mental illness first episode, late teens, early 20s. And there's a wraparound set of services you can give so that the first episode is the last episode. That has not been implemented as widely as I think it should be. I'll personally be pushing to see a broader implementation, availability of that program.
Senator, one last quick question. I'm going to frustrate my producers, but I think we're going to enter an era where many, many schools that are built in the future and freeways and buildings are going to be named after Vladimir Zelensky. When you heard President Zelensky speak to a joint session of Congress live in a virtual way and share this, you see what's going on where people are really literally fighting for democracy. We throw that word around loosely over here, but there it's very real. I'm just interested in how you personally feel about this moment. Are we doing what we should be doing? Are there elements here where we don't see missiles, taking down theaters with innocent people down the street, but we're seeing it live on TV? And I'm just interested. I would be remiss if I didn't ask you about this moment.
Yeah, we certainly have a balance. On the one hand, we have to support President Zelensky as much as possible, and on the other, we have to avoid a potential World War III. And I think there are ways to support the Ukrainian people. Obviously, we're doing it with the weaponry we're giving. I have no doubt we're passing intelligence along to them. As regards controlling the skies, which is where the bombs come to blow up the theater, the transfer of SAM 300s, Soviet-era anti-aircraft systems, which the Ukrainians are used to using, the drones that they've used to great effect. And personally, it wouldn't bother me if a group of Ukrainian tourists happened to step into a MiG in Poland and fly them to Ukraine and never come back. Folks say, is that an escalation? I point out that in the Vietnamese War, in the Vietnam War, the Russians gave the North Vietnamese lots of MiGs, and that was not considered an escalation. So if those Ukrainian tourists happen to fly them to Ukraine and keep them there, I think that's within the rules of the game.
Fascinating comment. Senator Bill Cassidy from Louisiana. I always love our discussions. Thank you so much, my friend.
Thank you, Steve.